Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Alexey, and today I have a special guest, Adair Daufembach. Adair is a producer, mixing and mastering engineer who has been working with such great metal artists as Angra, Kiko Loureiro, John Wayne, and many more. Also, Adair has won the whole course on mixing Angra's song A Rising Thunder on Nail the Mix. So, if you want to learn from Adair how to mix symphonic power metal, you can check out his session on Nail the Mix. It's a huge honor to have you on my YouTube channel today, Adair. And let's start our interview. My first question is how you became a sound engineer.
How I became a what? Sorry? Sound engineer. Well, I recorded one album with a friend of mine. We had a band back in Brazil, like I'm talking about 1999. And of course, after my first experience in the studio, I was like, my God, this is so awesome, and I started to be very interested in the subject. And then I recorded another album in 2001 with another band. And then I ended up like completely passionate about recording and stuff. So after having my first experience in the studio, I started researching and buying the equipment so I could record myself. So when I bought my first computer, there was initially the purpose of the computer was for me to use it in my school because I have a degree in law. I was supposed to be a lawyer. And then I was obviously using the computer just for recordings and of course for work too and for the university, but mostly for recordings. So after that, like everything started, and then I started recording local bands and everything happened very fast. Like it's been 25 years at this point, and it's weird because I remember everything so well, and yeah, that's how it started. Basically, my first experience in the studio made me very interested in the subject, and I really wanted to do that, as a professional.
How you got into mixing metal?
Because my first band was a metal band, and I obviously started working with metal bands. It was very natural, and I think that happens to anyone who starts. Like if you are a pop guitarist or I don't know, reggae keyboard player, for example, and it's natural that once you start working as a producer and you set up your first studio and stuff, most likely you work with the genre that you were working with and you were playing. And that's in 99, it was a metal band. And then the second album I told you, it was also a metal band. So once I started to record bands and stuff, obviously the first bands that, reached out to me were metal bands. And of course I wanted to learn because it was my favorite kind of music, I was very passionate about it. So that's how it started.
Angra has a lot of orchestral elements in their power metal music. And in this case, what is your approach on mixing orchestral elements in power metal in general?
I would say that the overall advice, let's say, or the thing that guides me when I'm mixing orchestrations in specifically on Angra in the album Aqua, the thing is that there is a lot of elements, so the first thing you have to take care of the volumes very well, like this is sometimes metal engineers in general, like people interested in music production, they focus too much on aspects like compression, EQ, but the most important thing is to check the levels first, and make sure listening to the arrangements and kind of trying to absorb what is the intention, what is the energy of each one of the parts For example, you can clearly, if there is a certain part that starts with horns, trumpets, and strings very high, and then in the middle you have like very low brass coming in, giving that very dramatic vibe. You know that must be very loud, you know. So understanding what is, you know, the what's happening on the arrangement, I think it would be the first thing. Second thing, you have to be very careful on compression, going, you know, towards the more technical aspect of things. You have to be very careful with compression in general, because that might destroy the whole orchestration. And also, if you really need to control the dynamics, I would definitely go for tape simulation and even limiting, and doing that channel by channel. You know, if I have to find some space for the orchestra in a mix that's already too busy, that has very heavy guitars, drums, and stuff like that, I would definitely try to first, I would definitely go like instrument by instrument, compressing them individually, and then compressing the groups like very, very little, you know, because same with like vocals, for example. I always see like orchestrations in general, like vocals, backing vocals especially. It's very tricky to compress them, you know, so it's always better to go one by one, and instead of just grouping all of them, sending all of them to a bus and compressing the whole thing, you know.
So in this case, have you ever had experience of mixing real orchestra? And if you have, so what is the difference of mixing real orchestra and virtual orchestra?
Yes, I had the pleasure of working with back in Brazil in 2012. I not only I mixed, but I also recorded in the studio in one of the most iconic studios in Brazil. I worked with Elmir Deodato, who already worked with Bjork, and he's a legend, you know, in Brazil. He already did some arrangements for Frank Sinatra, and we were in the studio recording orchestra. You know, it was a small orchestra, but I mean, 15 people, 20 people, but basically it was like acoustic instruments, you know, like, and we were doubling the stuff we were recording 2 or 3 times to give that big, very big feeling of an orchestra. And when I was mixing, surprisingly, I found it easier, you know, than when you were doing like with VSTs and stuff, because one of the main concerns when you were mixing, let's say, whatever strings or orchestra in general that are completely in the box, you know, completely with VSTs, is to make them sounding real, you know. And then reverbs are always tricky for me, because I don't know, I'm always not sure if it's sounding convincing enough, you know, if it sounds real. Because for me, every time I'm mixing orchestras that are not real, it's how to make them sounding real, you know. And when you are mixing real orchestra, you don't have to worry with that, you know. But of course, then there's the second element where you have mics that are more like drums, you know, where you have the leakage from other instruments, you know. But still, it's not a big deal, you know, like the leakage between the instruments, you know. Even though we were using condenser mics, U87s mostly on the recording, which naturally, you know, captures the sound of a lot of everything in the room, not only the instrument that is right in front of it, you know. But I would say that it's the same principle. Like you shouldn't compress too much, especially the bus. And if you really feel like you have to create space for the real orchestra, I would again go channel by channel. But this time, like, EQing everything better, because you have to separate the instruments, like, for example, filtering violins a little bit more than when you were mixing VST orchestra, I think that's it. It's not that much of a difference. I would say that the difference is that it's easier, because you don't have to fight with this problem of like, is it sounding real? Does it sound like convincing? So yeah, this was 2012 in Brazil, like a really nice project where this band mixes, plays like new metal with bossa nova. It's called Huasca. So if anyone here watching this video is interested, please go check online Huasca. Very nice band.
What tips can you give on getting drums?
Spend like 90% of the time mixing real drums, because I'm a specialist on drum recording. So I'm all the time recording drummers everywhere in the world, literally. So, and when it comes to mixing real drums, it's a little bit of everything that you just mentioned, like, because I've been using Silencer. It's a very nice tool. Multi-band compressors, I know that there is the trick of using the where you use the multi-band compressor as an expander, right? I don't use that much, but the key spike thing, it's something very useful. Usually before I on the mix prep, before I go to the mix, I create a MIDI channel, for each one of the closed mics, like bass, drum, snare, and toms, and then starting from there, I might do the trick where I will just expand. I'll grab like C6. Usually that's my compressor, my favorite multi-band compressor for doing that, and then I will just expand everything above, 500 hertz for toms usually. And for snare, usually Silencer is doing the job. It's doing a very good job. I've been running some tests with some other plugins, but I still didn't. I would love to share that, but I'm still not sure. It's still not part of my mixing process for real, so I will not make it official. Let's keep it for a second interview. Some plugins that, because now AI is taking over, and the thing that Moses does on drums, where it separates like bass, drum, snare, toms, hi-hat, and cymbals. Some companies, they're able now to do that in real time, and I'm still running some tests. I have a mix to start like in 1 or 2 days where I would do it for real, but maybe that's a very good, if it works, and I can maybe make a post on Instagram to talk about that. If it works, it's going to be very useful, because then you can lower, instead of cutting frequencies on EQ or with multi-band compressors, a tool like that, a plugin like that would be, pure magic, because then you can, for example, lower the cymbals on the room mics, and then you don't have to rely very much on samples. Because one thing I used to do a lot, and on the Angra album I did that, is to I use the closed mics, I use the natural sound, but sometimes you're still lacking ambience, even though it's real drums, you have room mics and everything. But back then in 2021, it's crazy because it was yesterday basically, but we just had a bunch of new plugins in the last like 2 years that changed the game completely. But when I was mixing Aqua, I didn't have any of those tools. So sometimes you have to add samples just for the ambience, which wasn't the case on that recording. I didn't use it, but some other stuff that I was doing at the same time, like in 2020, 2021, and even today, you have to add the ambience to the closed mics, just so you can have that. Because I hate reverb on closed mics. I hate it. I can't. It's just, especially on the snare top. So this is a great tip for anyone who's trying right now to get a really nice metal sound. Of course, this is for metal sound. It's don't try to get like that very nice snare sound, very full snare sound with that breath, right after the shot, like that. Don't try to get that sound by adding reverb on the closed mic channel. You definitely should add an ambience, like a sample that works as an ambience. That's not a secret. Like a lot of people does that, but that's something that I mentioned that as if it was my idea, because I started doing that by myself. I never read anywhere, never talked to anyone. I just saw I had some samples from the Drum Kit from Hell, like back in 2006 or 2007, and I was recording real drums already, but back then with the M Audio 1010 LT, like million years ago. And I remember that I was just not dealing very well with the reverbs on the closed mics. I was like, man, what I'm gonna do? This is just sounding horrible. And then I remember that I would copy and paste manually, like hit by hit, like the ambience of the snare. And then I was like, oh, that's awesome, because then it sounds a lot more convincing, because you actually have the sound of a snare in the room, a very big room, So going back to the plugin, like if it works, lowering the cymbals, for example, on the room mics, that's going to be very, very useful.
How to get a consistent bass track in a metal mix?
It's so cool we were asking that, because last week I was recording bass, and I'm starting to mix those basses that I recorded myself here in my studio. And I felt a big difference to the files I get from other people when I'm mixing for people all around the world, And it's so crazy because it's so much easier to record. I mean, I take care of the dynamics, of course, and what I do, I record with my either my Neve 1073 OPX, or I have an Overstair here too, MAS, that is a tape simulator, analog tape simulator. So usually that's how I do it. I record already cranking the signal, and recording very, very like a brick, very, very clipped already, but of course taking care. I mean, sometimes it doesn't matter if it's distorted, because you actually want distortion depending on the style, but that's on the technical side. But also another thing that is very, very important is like taking care of the performance, like it's, I can easily say that when I'm known, everybody, I think this is kind of a joke between some of my friends and people who knows how I work. Like I like bass players to play very hard, and the performance has to be very, very solid already. It has to be, you have to play every single note very loud and very clear. So I would say that a lot more important than the technical aspect, like which equipment you use or whatever, it would be like taking care of the performance, So that's why I love mixing. Life would be a lot easier if I was just mixing. But if I want to keep up with the quality of the stuff that I do, I still have to record the stuff, because the recording is what makes a record great, And on the bass, that's even more important, because the bass, it's very easy to see bass players that doesn't play hard enough, very, very easy. That's why, I don't know, I like a lot, for example, example, Jason Newsted, one of my favorite bass players. He used to play very with almost no dynamic, and that word is a very tricky thing in the music business in general, like, because everybody thinks that dynamics are a good thing, and of course it is important to have dynamics in the song, but usually if you ask someone to play the bass without any dynamics, like play all the notes with the exact same volume, they'll be scared. They'll be like, oh no, but then we don't have dynamics. But it's not about that, you, especially in metal, you have to create dynamics in some other ways, like if you're not using any equipment that already clips the signal, so you can have a very square signal. And please, anyone who's listening to this interview, be careful with that, especially if you don't want like distorted signal on your bass sound in the final mix. Be careful. But if you don't have that kind of equipment, you have to play it, One of the biggest secrets is like you have to listen to the DI signal without any plugins, anything, and hear every note. It has to be there. Like you cannot, if you're listening to the DI in solo and it's still not sounding how can I say, powerful enough or clear enough, you have to keep re-recording until you get it. And then after in the mix, I just do the classical thing, which is separating the low from the mid highs, So usually I split the signal around like 150, 120, and then I obviously compress the low end a lot, like crazy, and the rest of the signal not that much, And I like parallax a lot. As I said, like usually I record sometimes with distortion from those equipment, so maybe I don't have to add much distortion on the DAW, because it's already on the signal. But it's a very nice question, because in the end, the most important thing is the performance. You have to take care of the performance, basically.
So what gear did you use for guitars and bass recordings for Angra's A Rising Sun, the song?
That album, I didn't record that album. I just mixed it, That album, I know that was... What I did, I reamped the guitars, and then on the guitar reamping, I used a radio, reamp box, preamps. I think it was a Vintech VA73 Vintech audio preamp, and Chandler Little Devil preamp as well for the preamps, in a Mesa Boogie, not the oversized one, like Mesa Boogie cabinet, like the slant cabinet with vintage 30s of 70 watts. And the bass, I got it already pre-mixed by Felipe, which I know he told me that he was using parallax. That's it.
Do you use mixing templates? And what is your opinion on using mixing templates?
I spent half of my life hating mixing templates, and now I'm enjoying using mixing templates, I remember that up until 2014, I was still, starting the mix from scratch, every mix for every song, And then at a certain point, I just noticed, and that's people who doesn't like mixing templates, sometimes they don't realize that. Like, I just noticed that I ended up like staying doing the same thing always. You think that you're starting something different, but in the end, you start repeating a lot of the movements. Of course, it's never the same. But in the end, let's say that I used to add, I don't know, 60 dB on 5K on the guitars, and compressing the kick, 12 dB on the Elysia Expressor 500 with the ratio on 4, And then in another mix where I started from scratch, I ended up like adding the same stuff, if not the exact same amount, but something very similar. So after years doing that, I just realized like, man, come on, like it's a lot better if I start with the mixing template and then I just do few adjustments, because then your starting point is already very good. That's the point. It will not sound the same, because it will never work like that. Like if you, especially for example, I don't know, bass, bass guitars, like if I'm mixing a job that I recorded the guitars, I used to record the guitars with EQ already. So the stuff that I'm going to do in a mix that was recorded by me are going to be like very small moves. But if I'm getting guitars recorded by someone else, and there's a lot of people around, like either using plugins, or if they reamp the guitars. Usually they reamp the guitars without any additional EQ. I will just get the very raw signal. I will have to EQ a lot more. So basically, you have to start. I think it's very beneficial to start with the mixing templates, just so you can start having a sound and listening to things in a decent way in less than 1 hour, and then instead of spending 12 hours to start getting a decent sound, you already have a decent sound after 1 or 2 hours of mixing, and I think it's much better working with the template, because your starting point is a lot better, even if you end up like changing everything. Like maybe you just realize that your bus compressor, your master bus compressor is compressing too much, and then you have to change the whole thing. But still, like you already have the bass drum like kind of in place. Snare will sound like kind of cool. Guitar is the same. And then you start adding a little bit here and there. And by the end of the day, everything will be completely different, But your starting point is a lot better, I think, for me, made a huge difference, because in the end, even the time you spend on the mixing, it's the same. It's not that makes the mixing process faster. It's just that I think it just makes the mixing process better, because you start getting the sound of the stuff a lot earlier, and then you can make better decisions. And though that very final refinement you do in the very last stages of the mix are going to be a lot more precise, because you reach that level after like, I don't know, 8-9 hours of mixing, sometimes 10 hours of mixing, and if you're starting things from scratch, you get that only after 12-14 hours, so doesn't make any sense, like for me.
How often do you use automation in your mixes, and where do you usually use automation?
I go very, very wild on automation, on everything. Like, it would be great to find some kind of method where I could, let's say, compress the vocals a lot and not having to tweak it along the song, but that doesn't happen basically, because of the arrangement. For example, even if I compress the vocals like 75 dB just to get them very steady along the song, there is the arrangement. Sometimes you have lower notes on the vocals in a certain part, and that naturally will put the vocals a little bit in the back. And then you have to go and compensate that. Same for rhythm guitars. It's crazy, like sometimes you just have to lower the rhythm guitars because there is something else that must be more prominent in the mix. Let's say orchestra, sometimes you have a section that the orchestra is a lot more important. And then you might think, well, I will just keep the rhythm guitar in the same volume as the previous part. Let's say that you're in the verse, and then the pre-chorus has a lot of orchestra. You have to not only raise the volume of the orchestra that was already happening on the verse, on the pre-chorus. You have to raise the volume, but also have to lower the volume of the guitars So basically, the answer is like I do a lot of automation, like a lot of automation. Like when I open all the automation that happens in my session, it's insane, like especially when it comes to effects for vocals, I like to have, I don't know, at least 10 to 12, sometimes 15 different effects. And I will always, in different sections of the song, we use different effects, like, so for the verse, I will use a certain reverb. And then for the pre-chorus, I will use a different reverb. And then for the chorus, I will use 2 or 3 reverbs combined plus a doubler or whatever. So that it's also automation. And that makes my vocal chain, like on Reaper, like where you have all the automation lanes right below the track. It's very normal to have a session that has, 25 automation lanes, or something like that. Even for guitars, the same. If I'm recording guitars in the box with plugins, I just do the same, keep adding automation on the effects and everything all the time. It's insane, basically.
Do you master a track in a mixing session or separately?
Same thing on the template. I do it on the same session of the mixing. I have a mastering chain template, but you always have to change stuff, but again, it's always better, I think, to start if you have a mixing template and you start with your master bus already there and start listening to stuff already, completely smashed by clipping, limiting, compression, because if you start with a clean master bus, you might end up like getting used to the sound of the mix completely natural, and then once you start mastering it, you start to hate it so much. Especially for me, I love the sound of natural stuff when I'm recording. I love that not compressed at all sound that you're having during the recordings, because you don't have anything on the master bus, But that's a lie, the world it's different thing. Like you need to, in the end, reach -5 LUFS, -6. It's sometimes -4 now. Like it's becoming insane, this thing, So it's kind of, it depends. I'm not saying that it's not possible to get the sound first mixing and then mastering. If you're doing that along many years, maybe you get used to that. You learn how not to get too attached to the not compressed, not clipped, not limited master version of the song, and then you might learn how to do that. But I don't like it. I just start with everything on the master bus and start doing that. I think it's more realistic, Since the very beginning, you hear something that is a lot closer to the final result.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Adair, for such a wonderful interview. It was a huge pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for your wonderful and very knowledgeable session of mixing Angra song Rising Thunder on Nail the Mix, and I really hope to see you on Nail the Mix once again. Thank you so much for all of your wonderful work.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate that very much, and I hope that this interview will help a lot of people out there that is starting, and it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful interview, Adair. It was a huge pleasure talking to you. Again, please don't forget to check out Angra's session on Nail the Mix, mixed by Adair. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.